Oh, hi. It's really lovely to meet you all. And I've been promised that you're a very kind, friendly audience, so please follow through on that. But hopefully the drinks are already flowing, because I am very excited, because I've already met the rest of everyone who's speaking tonight. It's very cool. But thank you for that introduction. My name is Mya-Rose Craig, and I would describe myself as a birdwatcher and environmental campaigner. And I think I say birdwatcher first because probably more than anything in my life, I'm a birdwatcher. I have been birdwatching since I was 9 days old. My parents are birdwatchers. I was fresh out the hospital and a very rare bird showed up on the south coast and they decided they couldn't skip it. And I think my mum tried to sneak out of hospital a few days before to go and see it. And so I've spent my whole life out in nature, and basically all of my earliest memories are of looking at birds, to the point that I remember having a bit of a shock when I was about 4 years old and I started school, and I realised that not everyone else's families went bird watching at the weekend, and I found that incredibly strange. I didn't know what they were doing, and so it highlighted everything. And I think I'm 22 years old, and I think I'm kind of a generation where I don't remember learning about climate change. I don't remember learning about biodiversity loss. Those have always just been facts of the world that I have known about. And so this love of nature has always been completely intertwined with an awareness that it's struggling, that it's fading. And so even as a very young kid, I remember being very concerned about the state of birds, obviously, but the state of the planet as a whole. Slightly unrelated to that, I started secondary school when I was 11, and I kind of left my very provincial village school for a big one, and suddenly became very self-aware of the fact that bird watching was a bit weird, and that everyone else thought it was a bit weird, and that I didn't know anyone else who did bird watching. And so I knew various people from across the country who were a bit older than me, and the thing that they all did, which I feel like this ages this story now, the thing that they all did was blogging. And so I wanted to connect with this community. I was 11 years old, and I decided to start a blog, and I didn't know what to call it. And so I decided to call it Birdgirl because I was a girl who liked birds, and I didn't realise that kind of 12 years later more people would know me by that than my real name. So I'm glad it at least does sound like a superhero. But I started that blog just to be able to talk about and express my love of nature. And the thing I never ever expected was for people to start reading it, which was very weird. And so originally it was just kind of talking about the birds that I had seen on the weekend, but I think as a young person who felt very frustrated about the state of the planet, the state of nature, the biodiversity loss that even in my lifetime I had seen occurring, I kind of, having gained this platform, started using it just to kind of express those emotions, and more people started reading it, and it was very validating as a child that age to have people go like, actually, yeah, your feelings do matter, this is concerning, we hear you. And all of this kind of came together when I was 12 years old. And my mother's family is from Bangladesh in South Asia, which is a country that is terribly affected by climate change. There's massive flooding every year. But when I was 12 years old, there was also this terrible oil spill in the mangrove forest in the south, which is this incredible forest, loads of fantastic birds. Also one of the last places where you get the Bengal tiger. And I remember just being so upset and waiting to see it in the news, and it was just never mentioned. And so I decided, like, this is outrageous, I'm going to write it myself. I wrote a blog post, and I ended up mailing that off to a few different American magazines, and one of them published it, and people were outraged, and it ended up raising $30,000, which was incredible in terms of the Sundarbans, the mangrove forest, but also I think that was what I define as the start of my own campaigning journey, because it was just this incredible transition from a child who felt like they didn't have a voice, who couldn't do anything, to going like, actually, I do have this opportunity and I can make a difference and I can do something with all of those feelings. And that was over 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. And something I've come back to over and over again in terms of my own story is that I never would have started it, at least at that age, if it hadn't been for that love of nature and the outdoors. And so something that is very important to me is making sure that other people have the opportunity to experience nature and the outdoors, which I think seems kind of obvious perhaps, but I'm from Bristol in the southwest, and there are a lot of very poor communities where the kids have literally never left the city, even though it's a 20-minute drive, never seen a sheep, never seen a cow, never seen birds apart from pigeons. And so talking to these kids about why they should care about nature, they just go, I don't. And I think it's kind of understandable. And a lot of those communities where I live are Black and Asian. And so when I was about 13, I decided that I wanted to do something about that. And so I was already organising a nature camp that weekend, which was basically just a weekend of doing nature activities that I wanted to do, and it was going to be really fun. And I was like, okay, let's go and get some kids from Bristol and bring them out. Actually, when they first came, they made it so clear that they didn't want to be there. And I was just like, what have I done? I heard one of them talking to the other, and he was like, did your mum make you come? Yeah. Did yours? Yeah. And I was like, this is going to be terrible. But by the end of the weekend, I had watched these 5 very tough teenage boys just melt and fall in love with the environment. And that kind of proved to me that I think humans do have an innate love and care for nature. We're just kind of lacking the opportunities for connection. And so from there, I set up my charity, Black to Nature, which has been running for however long it's been, since 2015, sorry. And we've worked with hundreds of children, and every single one of them has fallen in love with nature. And we've talked to every single one of them about why they should care about nature. And I personally think that is the biggest flaw within the environmental movement right now. We're struggling with this terrible, environmental destruction, but that means nothing to people who have never experienced the environment in the first place. And so I think it's by breaking outside that bubble and figuring out how to communicate these issues and how to engage people in these issues, that's where the future really is. And so that's kind of the space that I have been working. And I'm going to have a chat in a sec, but just, I guess, where I've been since, because that was a long time ago. I was 13 when I started Black to Nature. I graduated from uni recently, and I've had the opportunity to do all sorts of fantastic things over the past few years. And I was asked to pick a few of my favourites, and one of them was I've met Greta Thunberg a couple of times. I spoke on a panel with her and Malala at the big UN climate conference a few years ago, talking about environmental justice and the way that we should be bringing people along with our environmentalism. And I got to go to the Arctic with Greenpeace. I lived on a ship with them for about a month in the Arctic Circle a few years ago when we were measuring the level of climate change, unfortunately. And I had this moment where I was able to sit out on the ice, and I did a protest out there for about 7 hours. And it was just this incredibly both enraging and therapeutic period where I was just completely by myself. They were worried the polar bears were going to eat me, but they left me by myself, and I was just sat there, and I could hear the ice melting around me, and I was so aware that my family on the other side in the world in Bangladesh was feeling the impact of that ice melting. And I think that's a moment that I will remember forever. But yeah, thank you guys for listening very intently.
I don't know. Thank you so much, Mya-Rose. That was really incredible and inspiring, and you have done so much. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, you have recently graduated. You've set up your own charity that's running for 10 years already. You've published 3 books. You've been involved in incredible campaigns all over the world. How do you find the time to do all of this? How do you fit it all in?
I was a very busy teenager.
I'd say so.
I think it was kind of my whole life for a while. Obviously not, because I think it surprises people when I say I was actually a normal teenager doing normal, having friends and things. But I think for a period of time, like I said, I felt so stressed about the state of the world that it felt very important to me to spend all that time. And actually, I think a big turning point for me was when kind of youth strikes for climate started and Greta Thunberg came up. And I remember going to my first protest and just like, I couldn't put my finger on why I felt this relief. And I realized that because I was surrounded by other people who I knew cared, and it was like, you know, this moment of actually this is a community. It's not obviously my responsibility, which sounds ridiculous, but I know so many people who kind of are single-handedly trying to save the world, which I'm not there anymore.
You're hitting on something really important there. I know myself, I was always passionate about nature and being in the outdoors, and was treated like, you know, a bit of an oddball, a tree hugger. And it wasn't until maybe I was kind of 15 or something, I went along to protests, again, also Greenpeace, and it was to do with atomic nuclear testing in the Pacific, and feeling this huge sense of relief that, oh my goodness, there's this whole community of people who feel the same, who are as interested and as passionate. And how do you think we can do more of creating community, of bringing people in? Because often people who are very passionate about whether it's moths or butterflies or birds, they're not necessarily into being activists or trying to kind of change things. They're more indulging their own passion. How do you think we can draw more of those people into activism?
I do personally think we're at a point in terms of our environment where I think if you really love a part of nature, you are aware of the ways in which it is struggling. So at that point, it's not ignorance, it's kind of ignoring, which I suppose is a different thing. But from my perspective, I absolutely, like I said, think you have a responsibility to kind of put your best efforts into trying to help it. But I also think on the flip side, a lot of people think that kind of activism or campaigning would be a bit of an energy vacuum, but actually everyone I know who does it, because you have these feelings of stress either way. Everyone I know who kind of goes out and finds other people who care and does something, it's incredibly energizing because it kind of gives you a little bit of relief where it's like, I'm trying, versus otherwise you're just frozen. And so especially to a lot of the younger kids I talk to, I do just say, like, go out, even if it's just your local like youth strikes for climate group, and find some other people and talk to them about why you care and what you want to do.
And when you went out doing the Youth Strike for Climate, were there many people there when you started?
Oh yeah, which I think is, in retrospect, means that there was loads of other kids and teenagers who felt the same as me, because it was just this, like, I've been to lots of protests, but that very first Youth Strike one where it was just like hundreds and possibly thousands of other like 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, it was just incredible. And I think really kind of speaks to where the youth were at as well.
Yeah. And then the charity work that you do with the kids from Bristol, from inner city Bristol, you said that a few of those were kind of initially quite reluctant. They didn't want to be out there. How do you think they kind of came about? Was it being enchanted by specific things in nature, or was it learning about the bigger picture of the loss of nature and inequality?
Yeah, I'd say a lot, probably less so now because they know what they're signing up to, but a lot of the kids, especially when we first ran, like they were so clear they didn't want to be there. They were like, I don't like nature, I don't like being outside, animals are boring, but within like a day. And it would be anything from the fastest transformation was this like 8-year-old girl who came out on the minibus and she was miserable the whole time, and then she stepped off the bus and she just like turned to one of the volunteers and she went, it smells of cow poo, and she went, but I like it, it's nicer than the pollution, and therefore she loved it. But for the older kids, it's like just finding a way to engage with nature, and that can be anything, that can be science, photography, just, you know, finding a certain type of animal. But I think especially for people who already like nature, for me when I was younger, realising that not everyone, like I said, wanted a pair of binoculars to go down to the local nature reserve to stare at birds. And so it's kind of making spending time in nature less prescriptive and just being literally spending time in nature.
Yeah, I think a big part of it as well is that everybody is so different and everybody's got their own, as you say, some might be into photographing, some might be into logging, everybody's got their own approach. It's about finding that. And that's something that you've drawn on as well in, was it your first book, 2021? You had a book, and you've interviewed We Have a Dream.
Yes.
So you interviewed, tell us a little bit about that book.
I did, yeah. So something I mentioned a bit less is this kind of desire for perspective in terms of the climate movement as well. I think bringing in people from all over the world is incredibly important. So I did this book where I interviewed 30 young Indigenous activists from around the world, from like not every continent, from all 6 continents, and they were all under 30, and it was literally just going and asking them about their journey, and it was so interesting. And one of the things that stood out to me was so many of them were so young when they started. I mean, one of the girls I interviewed, I think, was 8 years old when she started doing campaigning for clean water, and that was because her family did not have clean water. It's something out of pure necessity. But I wrote it partially, it's for everyone, but I wrote it at a young enough level where kids would be able to read it as well and to go, actually, there is hope and I can do something too, because I do really think that having hope is important. Or no, I think on the flip side, kind of giving up is very lazy, because we're not all going to like die tomorrow. There is so much to save, and you know, there is a future to save. And there was a study done a few years ago where it's like 50% of people my generation think that there's no hope, so they're not going to bother trying. And I do think it's almost kind of lazy, because there is hope and there is a point. And so I'll always tell people, you know, that's why it's so important to try and do whatever bit that is.
That cynicism is a major feature. I speak to a lot of people who are absolutely cynical, and it feels like it is a bit of an excuse to just not really engage anymore, to not inform yourself, to not take action. What would you prescribe for somebody coming in who you know cares but is very cynical?
I mean, the thing I always remind people of is it's not like a cliff we're going to fall off. It is just like it's a decline, and stopping there on the hill rather than there is always going to be better. And that a lot of this is a numbers game, and it actually goes back to what I was saying before about finding community. I think just the most difficult thing is energizing yourself and keeping that energy. I know a lot of young people who've like given everything to the environmental movement and they're just burned out, and we've never heard from them again, which is why supporting one another and, you know, all of that side of things is so important.
Yeah, I have looked into a little bit of reading on the psychological approach to maintaining involvement with activism and with groups, and they say that there's 2 key ingredients, and one is being in nature, being in natural spaces, whether it's bird watching or botanizing or whatever, and the other is that feeling of doing it collectively, of taking actions collectively. So even if it's mapping your neighborhood for bike racks or organizing an event together with your peers, that feeling that you're part of a movement is really crucial to keep people engaged and positive and prevent burnout.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's what, like, it's not some theoretical thing. That's what I do for myself as well, to keep myself going.
And it's another, when we think about youth engagement with climate, there is this, I guess, an assumption that only certain people have the right to engage with nature, with environment, with taking action or campaigning. And that tends to be either professional ecologists, conservation scientists, or landowners and farmers. Now, I'm leaving out a few there. But one of the big flip side, so for you it's birds and people. And a lot of what you do is trying to widen the reach of who feels that they have a right to have a voice in campaigning and in advocacy.
I think that is so important in terms of, because we're not trying to finish something, we're trying to build something new, and part of that is making sure that we're bringing everyone into the fold, including, I really enjoy talking to quite young kids about what they want from the future, because I find that very energizing as well. But I think in general, basically all the environmental issues we have right now are born from this feeling of almost total separation with nature, and that is obviously physical, but I think kind of emotional and psychological as well. But obviously those things are incredibly intertwined, and when on a very basic level there's this feeling of like, I'm not physically allowed to go into nature, or I do not have the skill required to spend time in nature, I think also increases the separation of why people would care or not about environmental issues, because it's like, I'm not allowed to go there and I don't know anything about it. And so, I mean, I don't know what the laws here are, but in the UK you don't have a right to roam. You can't go wherever you want in the countryside, unlike in Scotland. And I think that stuff like that, where the land itself is privatised from the people who live on it, I feel like that kind of sums up a lot of, well, basically the relationship that we have with it, which is, I think, really sad.
Yeah, we have similar problems in Ireland in terms of access to nature. So we've got an urban cohort who don't necessarily have time and a car to go out and go into nature. But we also don't have, like, access tends to be limited because Spruce Plantations run by Cuilche, the state forestry, or, you know, there's very limited access to outdoors here.
It's everywhere now, and then people are like, why can't we do anything? But yeah, anyway.
And that's quite a catch-22 because people aren't going to fight for nature or whichever aspect of nature they're in love with if they don't have any access to fall in love with nature in the first place. So we have the twin challenge of providing access and nurturing that bond.
Yes.
Tell me, when you obviously are a very, very busy person with this hugely busy, impressive schedule, do you ever feel eco-anxiety or overwhelm? Do you ever start to feel cynical? And if you do, what do you do about it?
Yeah, I definitely start to feel cynical, and I literally turn around and I go to myself, no, you're not allowed to do that, because like I also think there's no benefits to it. It's unhelpful in terms of the work I want to do, and it's also just a more unpleasant way to live. And I think for me, like I mentioned, gaining strength from meeting other people, but I think actually the thing that gives me hope is just all of the incredible people I've met. And actually doing that book that we're talking about, We Have a Dream, it was during COVID, which was quite a difficult period anyway, and it was just this incredibly energizing project where I was just like, all of these incredible people are dedicating their lives to saving the planet around the world. Like, the planet is in very good hands and people are trying, and therefore I really have to do my bit as well. But I think also, you know, like I said, it's not going to be the apocalypse tomorrow. There is so much hope if we look around us.
And that's you referencing hope in your latest book, Birdgirl. The byline is looking to the skies in search of a more hopeful future.
Yeah.
Right, with Penguin. Yeah. Has that had a strong reception? I imagine it has.
It has, yeah. I wrote that during COVID as well, actually, and it was just this incredible project. It was really cool. It's very weird. It kind of talks about my relationship with birds and nature and campaigning, but also mental health and stuff like that over the years. And it's very strange turning your life into a narrative, because it made me go like in so many ways like, oh, of course, one of those being, and it sounded very obvious when I said it just now, I started campaigning so young because I love birds. And I only pieced that together when I was like 17. But it was just, I loved writing it. And a lot of people have said, well, actually, the nicest compliment is when people have read it and said, I've decided I'm going to start bird watching, which is why I originally wrote it, actually. I wanted to write a book about birds because I've spent my whole life with people going like, but why birds? Of all hobbies, why would you do bird watching? So it's really nice that people are reading it and going like, oh, I get it now.
I must read it. I remember deciding in my late teens, quite specifically, you're going to be horrified, that there were so many people who were so into birds and knew so much about birds. So I wasn't going to, I was going to look at plants and insects specifically. I made that decision, which might sound odd. But what would you say to, now I've moved on from that and have worked for Birdwatch Ireland, BirdLife Europe, and I'm very passionate now about birder as well. But what would you say to anybody here in terms of a tip or advice for getting into the world of birds?
I'd say one of my favourite things about birds over anything else is that they are literally everywhere. And I mean literally, like even being in the park this afternoon, I got to explore the city for a few hours. It's beautiful. And I was seeing some wonderful species literally like a foot away from. So I would ask everyone to just look and stop and look up and see what birds are around them, even when they are in the middle of the city or by their homes or whatever, because I promise you there are more than like gulls and pigeons. And I think it's such a nice way to stay tethered to nature, even when it feels very, very distant. So carry on looking up, please.
Thank you so much, Mya-Rose. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.